Hello. Today I want to talk a bit about Nigel Farage. Now, Farage is a conman. He's someone who knows extremely well what everybody else is doing wrong, despite the fact that he hasn't got any answers. And he is the one person, more than anybody else, who is responsible for Brexit. Something that he doesn't talk about very much these days. Now, if you look at how things are following Brexit, if you look at the state of the country right now, it's very easy to say, oh, well, look at Germany, they're not doing very well. It's very easy to say everybody else is suffering. It's not just us, it's not Brexit, it's COVID and it's Putin and all the rest of it. But the fact of the matter is that we are doing extremely, extremely badly since we left the European Union. If you look at just the last few days, figures that have come out, in December, our debt interest was 17.8 billion. That's more than double what it was a year earlier, and it's the highest since the pandemic. Sainsbury's announced last week they're going to cut 3,000 jobs. We're going to see lots of job losses from now on. The Chancellor is rowing back on the non-dom regulations because it's transpired that 10,000 wealthy individuals have left the UK since they brought in the proposal to change the non-dom regulations. It was announced this morning that the number of companies who are now in significant financial distress, in other words, they're struggling to survive, amounts to 654,765. The number of companies that are in critical financial distress, that means they're really on the point of going under, they're about to be closed down, is 46,583. Now, let me tell you something about a firm's closing down. Okay, you've got a firm and you're employing 20 people. Now, every week you sell goods or services and you pay VAT to the government. And every week you deduct PAYE and national insurance from all your 20 employees and you pay that over to the government. You have premises and you're paying local taxes to the local council. And you buy petrol and you pay for all sorts of different services, all sorts of other firms that you employ to help you in one way or another. And all those firms are depending upon you and others to keep going. And so when a firm closes down, it's not just it ceases to exist, that's that. A huge range of taxes are no longer being paid by that company. And not only that, a lot of those 20 employees or whatever it is may not be able to find jobs that easily, and a lot of them will end up on getting benefits. And so the cost of a single firm going down is really, really, really serious. Apart from, of course, all the mental stress that is involved in people losing their jobs and firms closing down. And so the cost of firms closing down is really, really a lot higher than just a firm being there one day and not there the next day. And this is all part, these things are all part of the consequences of our economy being so much weaker because we're exporting that much less. And because, as we all know now, because the way things are worked out, if you want to export anything to the EU, there are barriers which are almost insurmountable in terms of bureaucracy and so on. Whereas people wanting to export from the EU to the UK just drive the stuff in and there are practically no controls whatsoever. So we're in a really weakened state as a result of Brexit, and this is all really as a result of Farage. If he had never existed, if he'd never started going on about Brexit in order to promote his own career, none of this would have happened. And when you look back at Farage, he's a son of a stockbroker. He went to Dulwich College. At one time, he was about to be made a prefect, and one of the teachers wrote to the headmaster saying she didn't think he should be a prefect because he seemed to be a bit of a fascist. That's at the age of in his teens. When he left school, he went into the city himself, and then I think after a while he decided that he'd get into politics. He obviously realised by then that he had the gift of the gab and that he was quite extrovert. And so he formed UKIP, and in 1999 he was elected to the European Parliament. He was there for 20 years, during which time I think he took very little part, apart from criticising everything. And he boasted at one stage that he had claimed in a period of 10 years, he claimed more than £2 million in expenses. The man is obsessed with making money. Because he's such a character, because he's got this gift of the gab, he is constantly being invited on television to promote his views. And he appeared, I think, 30 times on Question Time, more than anybody else apart from Paddy Ashdown. And this was, of course, a terrific opportunity to spread this philosophy that he knew everything. He knew what everybody... He's the one man in the country who knows what everybody else is doing wrong. And he knows all the answers, except that he doesn't know the answers. And so he started to promote Brexit, and it went on and on and on. And eventually, as we know, Cameron took fright. He was worried about how UKIP were doing and so on, and so agreed to a referendum. And we all know what the consequences have been. And now Farage, he's the leader of Reform. And this is a party that, when you think about Brexit and the damage it's done, think about all these things I was saying just now about people being poor and all over the country, particularly in the red wall areas and so on. There are people who can't afford to feed their children, people who are going to lose their jobs, people who can't afford to pay their rent or the mortgage or whatever, people in terrible distress, all as a result of Brexit. And yet these same people are listening to Farage saying he's got all the answers. And they're all supporting him, and he's got huge support. I mean, Reform has got enormous support. And when you look at this party, there's Farage, there's his butler, that Tice, and then there's Lee Anderson. That's it. And there's another MP, isn't there, who was sent to prison for beating up his girlfriend. And that's it. That's the party which has every chance of being the government after the next election. It's quite possible. I mean, he was even in America last week saying that he could well be the next British Prime Minister. I must say, I think it's very, very unlikely. And there again, he's such a pathetic figure, because you see how he sucks up to Trump. How when Trump had that sort of mock assassination attempt, with the blood on the ear and all that stuff that mysteriously healed up instantly. And he was supposed to be in Parliament, and instead he decided to fly off to America to see Trump. And when he was interviewed about why he was going, and he had more important things here, he said he wanted to go and see his friend who just survived an assassination attempt. And then, of course, he got there, and Trump didn't want to see him. And last week, he and Braverman and Truss and all those rabble went off thinking that they'd be welcomed with open arms, and they ended up watching the inauguration on the television outside. So he's a rather pathetic little man, and also, of course, Musk has completely swamped him by saying that he's unfit to lead Reform. Nonetheless, he still has this huge amount of support, and it's really quite concerning. I think what is so concerning, and this applies the same to Trump and to Boris Johnson, it's that there are such a large proportion, probably the majority of the electorate, who are really not very interested in politics. And it's very easy, if you're charismatic as Farage is, as Johnson is, as Trump is, if you've got the gift of the gab, if you can tell people with certainty that you've got the answers, it's very easy to see how people just say, well, I'll go along with that, he sounds more confident. And you look at the present situation, if you had an election tomorrow, you've got the Conservatives, well, nobody's going to elect them, especially with a dreadful Badenoch making a fool of herself every week. And then you've got Labour, who are really just sort of, much the same as the Tories, not really doing very well, and so many things going wrong and so on. And then you've got the Reform. They know everything. They can sort it all out. Farage can sort the whole thing out, and you can see how seductive that is and how people will vote for it. And at the same time, he's all the time finding ways to make money. Do you know, there was a report in The Guardian, I think last week, saying that Farage is earning well over £1 million a year outside of his parliamentary salary. He's 60 now, and 63. When he becomes 63, he's going to get a salary of something like 60% his salary in the EU. The guy's only interested in money and being on the television. And he, as I say, he is the man who is responsible for Brexit. He is responsible for all the consequences of Brexit. When you look around you and you see what is happening, you see the state we're in, it's all down to Farage. And somehow, all these poor, gullible people who were persuaded to vote for Brexit are now backing him because he's got all the answers. It's very sad, but I don't know what you can do about it. Now, the other thing I want to talk about today is an interview I saw from Davos. Now, as you know, we're in a bit of a state, and I think everybody knows we're in a bit of a state. It's no secret now. We're heading towards being the poorest country in Europe, despite having a huge amount of capital and so on. In terms of our economic performance, we're getting worse and worse and worse. And there was an interview by Bloomberg. They interviewed Rachel Reeves and our new Secretary of State for Industry and Business, a guy called Johnathan Reynolds. Johnny, he's known as. Now, Johnny, he started out in life as a sort of political advisor, and he then trained to be a solicitor. I don't know if he qualified or not. And then he spent several years as an assistant to an MP called James Parnell. And then eventually he got elected to Parliament, I think in the 2016, I think. And he's now, as I say, the Secretary of State for Industry and Business. And so he's had not one single day's experience of business in his entire life. Now, this interview, as I say, was Bloomberg interviewing him and Rachel Reeves. Now, Rachel Reeves she's a canny operator. I mean, she's very clever. She's very smart. She's known as being a particularly accomplished chess player. And she didn't put a foot wrong in this interview. She had all the right answers. You know, skilled politicians always got the right answers. They very, very, very seldom slip up or make fools of themselves. But unfortunately, she'd taken Johnny along with her, and I just want to read you some excerpts from this interview. They're quite long, but I think they're worth hearing because they give you an idea of the sort of person who is now in charge of making us the fastest growing economy in the G7, going to make us an AI superpower. This man is going to just grab the economy and make us great again. So the interviewer began, he talked about Trump's inauguration, and he said Trump's already kicked off with tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He said, I suppose my question is, you know, how vulnerable are we to this? Because especially given the fact that we've already come out of the European Union. You mentioned European Union, that's not what they really want to be questioned about. And so there was an awkward pause, and neither Rachel Reeves nor Johnny said anything. And then he said, well, one of you, and then Johnny jumped in. He wanted, I think, to assert himself and show the boss, you know, he knew what he was talking about. So he says the following, and it's quite a lot, but it's worth listening to. I'll stop you right there. Good morning, everyone. It's a year. I mean, going around Davos, making eye contact with all your trade ministerial counterparts, you can imagine what is on our minds, right? And the conversation. But I think there were a few things on this. First of all, yes, the UK is a very globally orientated, trade-intensive economy. That is a good thing. That openness to the rest of the world will be championed by this government, and actually there are opportunities to expand on that. I think that's a unique selling point in terms of our relationship with the Gulf and the trade deal we're negotiating. Our aspirations with India, the EU reset, hopefully. Maybe some things with the US come out of this, the China engagement that you have kicked off, Chancellor. So, you know, yes, there's a vulnerability and there's a strength that comes from that openness to the world as well. So let's recognise that. On the second thing is, look, we understand there was a genuine, analysis in the US that feels that the very big trade deficits in goods of the US house, both with the EU and with China. You know, the sense of unfairness, that is the proof point until we understand that we might disagree, but we will engage with that. Now, you're right to say that we are an incredibly globally orientated economy. I don't think anybody else said that apart from him, but anyway. But also, we obviously don't have that trade. The US does not have that trade deficit on manufactured goods with the UK. We said this to the Cabinet last week. Both the UK and the US actually believe we have a surplus of each other on goods because of asymmetric statistical quirks. So there's a basis for a conversation as to the future. But it would be a choppy time to be a trade minister. There's no doubt about that, especially if you don't know what you're doing. But our job is to navigate through that. And I do believe, the unique pitch from the United Kingdom can be, first of all, a return to political stability, which we appreciate after the Brexit referendum has been challenging in the UK. But that's also relative to some of the European countries as well, that pitch to openness. And then I know some of you want to get into, which is the willingness of this new government to use its mandate, to use the opportunity we have to fundamentally improve the business and investor environment in the UK. Now that is garbage. He's just utter gobbledygook. And he's the man who's spearheading our attempts to become a global superpower. Later in the interviewer says, Johnny, can I come to you on the issue of growth again? It strikes me you look at a lot of things you've been talking about. The Chancellor's been talking about, planning, reform, infrastructure strategy, pensions reform, making regulators more friendly. Those are quite kind of long-term things, while what businesses are looking for desperately is something short-term to make up for the tax rises. Is there anything you particularly can sort of focus on there? Johnny says, I would come back a little on that, because I think what businesses want to fundamentally see from us is, are we good for our word? When we say growth submission, how are we going to prove that? How we're going to convince people that that is absolutely where our political priorities will lie? Exactly as Rachel has said, they've heard from other people, other governments in the past. They want to know, when you get that countervailing pressure, well, what about this? What about that? What about that person not liking it all? We're going to say, no, this is the mission and this is the imperative, and we are. So I don't think it's about people just banking the long term, because the one thing the UK has needed in the last few years is more of a long-term serious focus. Let's be frank, we've been bobbing along from one Prime Minister to the next, sometimes months, right? So they want that long-term focus, and I think that's where you get the confidence. If people do not look at the UK, they risk missing out. But that's genuinely the case, because this is a government so resolved to make the difference, because we know that is what we have to do. So I don't think it's a question of, okay, people think the long term is great. They want the short term. They want to see that long term following through and the commitment that comes with that. And then they will see when, some of the pressures, some of the conversations about global trading position, the leadership role the UK will take in terms of open markets being a key part of that. I mean, as we both said, we want to stress, we recognise the challenge of our inheritance and how we've got to, provide people with the confidence and certainty for the future. It is important to say, we sell, you benchmark, payroll taxation in the UK, still very internationally competitive capital gains tax, corporation tax, lowest in the GA7, with the best allowances available. So there's a compelling competitive offer there. But what you need, I think, to generate that confidence is people recognising that this government is serious. I mean, where do you start with that? So then there's one more question coming a bit later on. Surely the single thing that you could do that would give the most amount of growth, is to do a fresh deal with Europe, to do something like a customs union. That's what virtually every number that people have run on that shows the biggest increase in GDP compared with all other things. Now they didn't want to talk about Brexit. So Johnny he replies as follows: It's first of all, will this debate ever end? I think and then the interviewer says, listen, I didn't say rejoining the European Union, I said something akin. And so then Johnny says, I would say something that, first of all, we want, and again, there's a high degree of ambition on our side, a reset of that relationship with Europe. And there's a whole range of specific elements to that. The SPS proposals, the mutual recognition of qualifications, the regulation of goods in particular. We work for an ambitious conversation about that. I do think, again, people sometimes fail to recognise that, the problems, evident problems, the challenges of leaving the European Union to the UK were obviously about a significant change in our terms of trade. But the political uncertainty that came with that was also a real problem. And so our decision to not relive, not to reflect those arguments, but to focus on improving that relationship, practical things, as well as build those relationships with the Gulf, with India, maybe the US. Look at how we've been an outlier in terms of our lack of engagement with China. How can we turn some of that around? Difficult, but important to do. I think that is a much more comprehensive approach. And I think you've got to recognise, if you're, as we have, leaving something about the single market, there's a cost that you have to mitigate that. But I think a conversation just about Europe, honestly, isn't enough in its own right to give the UK the platform. Then finally, later on, he says, and I would just say on that, from my perspective as a government department, I'm absolutely convinced we could spend money as a country in a better way. Our industrial strategy is partly about coordinating government policy across a whole range of departments. I look at how we've done that as a country in the past, and we get the effectiveness of that. When we look at the different regulatory burdens of different departments, who considers the aggregate burden on business? I'm convinced we could do that. We know you always want to know. You spend more or less on something, or regulation more or less of it. It's not that, it's about the proportionality of those things, the effectiveness of that. And we're up for that conversation because that's how we make the biggest difference. And that's our Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, and how he's going to make us a worldwide superpower. And apparently it's all going to be this growth, this becoming a superpower, is all going to be based on AI. And I just wanted to say finish with a couple of words about AI. There are so many more urgent, more pressing things to be dealt with in the economy. We have to create lots and lots and lots and lots of businesses to try and generate some sort of economic activity which the government can then tax and pay its way. But we're doing it all with AI, and they had that conference a few months ago where they said they'd raised, 50 billion or something. I think a lot of it had already been pledged under the Conservatives anyway. But anyway, they're going to build data centres and so on, and so that we can stand tall alongside China and America, as though other countries are not also investing in AI. But I just wanted to mention, this puts it into context a little bit, as to what happens when you form a company in this country that does well in AI. There's a firm called DeepMind, which was formed in, I think, 2010. And it was developing AI, and it was really very, very successful. And by 2014, they'd done so well that Google came along and made them an offer of somewhere between 400 and 650 million, just four guys, for this company. Well, of course, that was an irresistible offer, and Google would have paid whatever to get that company. Now, that company, 10 years later, it now has a market capitalisation of £67.5 billion. And whereas we're talking about raising sort of 30 billion, and that's a game-changing amount of money for AI in this country, Trump, on his second day in office, he called in Sam Altman from OpenAI and Larry Ellison from Oracle and Mr. Masayoshi from SoftBank, and announced that the Americans are going to invest $500 billion, $500 billion in developing AI. And you realise we're just so tiny to try and get involved in that. It's fine. We're good at it. Let's keep on developing and so on. But that's not going to solve our problems. Our economic problems are much more profound, much deeper, and much more widespread. And we could have a different outlook. And when you've got someone like Johnny there, Johnathan Reynolds, who is absolutely clueless, talking utter rubbish, it's very difficult to have much confidence. And I think I'm sure Rachel Reeves must have been thoroughly embarrassed to have him beside her in that interview. But I have a feeling, I think Rachel Reeves is finding things a lot more difficult than she expected. I think the reaction to the employers' national insurance probably wasn't expected. I think having to backtrack on the non-dom regulations, and I think all in all, it's probably going to get her down a bit, and I wouldn't be the least bit surprised she doesn't call it a day at some stage. And as I said before, I think many people think that would bring Starmer down. And I just want to finish finally by saying, I think if that were to happen, if Starmer were to go, there is one person, in my view, and I just want to put it on record here, there's one person in my view who is metaphorically and physically head and shoulders above everyone else in the cabinet, who I think would probably be a very good prime minister, especially if you start off saying, now look, Brexit's not working, we've got to have another look and see if we can't change things a bit. And that is the first secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. I think he's just the only person I can see who could solve things. I may be completely wrong on that. I'll leave this video up here, and maybe in a year's time everybody will laugh at me, but I think that might happen. I just don't see how with these, every week as I started with, I have these more and more figures showing how badly the economy is doing, how unemployment's going up, and how we're getting more into debt, and how the debt's becoming almost unmanageable, and all these firms that are on the brink and so on. Something profound has to happen. Something dramatic has to happen. We're not going to muddle through this, especially not with Johnny running things. So anyway, that's what I think about it. If you watched this far, thank you very much indeed. If you haven't already subscribed, I'd be really grateful if you do so. And so until next week, thank you for watching, and bye for now.